Okay, so good morning, colleagues, and welcome to the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg Research Data Management and Security Workshop. My name is Kokezo Pila, and I will be your moderator for today. And just to notify you that this session is being recorded, and I would like to start off by thanking all our attendees for taking the time to join us. And most importantly, we would like to thank our presenter, Dr. Sithembiso Khumalo, for his effort with preparing and giving this presentation. Before introducing Dr. Khumalo to you, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules and some important information. And so for the housekeeping rules, if you do have questions during the presentation, please raise your hand if you would like to speak, or you can type your question in the chat box. I will then indicate to the presenter to address your question. And as I've mentioned, the session is being recorded and the presentation slides will be requested from the presenter, and both the presentation slides and the recording will be uploaded on our Moodle community before the end of the week. And also a feedback survey will be sent out during the session on the chat box. We would like to please request for you to fill the survey out so that we can get some information and some feedback on whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve in the future, as well as to provide some kind words to our facilitator for their hard work. And this will also be used for the facilitator and RCD's reporting. And also this ensures that you will receive the certificate of attendance. So without any further ado, I will then introduce our presenter, Dr. Sithembiso Khumalo, by reading out his bio. So Dr. Sithembiso Khumalo is a senior lecturer and head of department in the Department of Information and Knowledge Management, School of Consumer Intelligence and Information Systems. He is the former deputy HOD in non-subsidized programs in the IKM department in the College of Business and Economics at the University of Johannesburg. He holds a BA degree in Public Management and Governance, a BA honors degree, a master's and PhD in Information Management at UJ. His main research area include knowledge portals, strategic information management, strategic intelligence and entrepreneurship, innovation and commercialization dynamics. Dr. Sithembiso Khumalo is a stoic pragmatism young leader with a unique collaborative leadership style. He is an entrepreneur at heart. His teaching and learning is driven by innovation, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, and crafting new ideas into commercializable products or services capable of improving societal issues or problems. Further research interest includes decision science, data science, business intelligence, and knowledge systems, information and knowledge strategies, and entrepreneurial universities. And without any further ado, I will hand over to our presenter, Dr. Sithembiso Khumalo. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Kokezo. Much appreciated. I just want to double check with you and hopefully even in the audience that I am audible and you can see my slides and you can see my my face as well. If I can just confirm before I proceed.
Yes, we can see you, we can see the slides, and you are audible enough. Thank you.
100%. Thank you so much for that. First things first, I would like to send in an apology for at least for running a bit late from my end. Again, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Research Capacity Development Office for inviting me to present my my approach into research, data management, and security. It is a really privilege to be part of this presentation for all the students and even probably even staff members that are currently sitting and everyone else coming from different places. Without explaining too much, Kokezo has done the introduction. I am Dr. Sithembiso Khumalo from the Department of Information and Knowledge Management. So I was tasked actually, or rather invited to actually give you guys an overview and a presentation on research management and security. And the most important aspects that we need to consider when we actually embarking on our research research writing, the data collection, all the way to dissemination or archiving your information or publicizing your information. So, so this presentation will actually outline a couple of points that I would like for us to discuss today. So the first one, we'll be looking at the introduction to research and data management. So basically here, I want us to have an overview of what actually constitute research data management, right? And here we'll also touch on a couple of aspects as well, like your research data management life cycles. I'll also just briefly touch on the three most important concepts of why we have to actually do research data management and security when you are actually conducting research. We'll move then into the different ways of collecting data and research, which majority of PG or rather postgraduate students are familiar with, but we'll just reiterate and just make sure that we are on the same page regarding those. And then we'll look at the importance of managing research data, because it is very significant that we manage this data, because I've seen many people in my encounters and even myself in my early research years where we actually don't understand the importance of managing your research. And you'll see it comes in later on, depending on where you're going to go into your career. You will see that the importance of managing this data is important for other activities or other events that you might actually find yourself in, or how having to complete certain activities. And then I'll move on to the different strategies for managing data. You look at the different tools and ways of storing research. Very important, the last 2 points is the significance of treating research data with policy confidentiality and obviously complying to POPIA Act when it comes to research. And then we'll also look at why is it important for a researcher to comply to institutional policies regarding research data. So I would like to open up with a definition from my end, which refers to research data management, which, if I can read it directly from Chu Shu Wen, they say here, it involves the organized handling of data throughout a research project life cycle. So bear in mind the very important aspect, the life cycle. So a lot of people do not understand the importance of the life cycle of a research data, or rather research data management, which normally includes planning, collecting, storing, preserving, and obviously sharing the data that you currently have. And along that, making sure that your research is findable, accessible, obviously interpretable, and most importantly, reusable. So that's one of the most important aspects of data management. And one of the other data management definition from Dr. Thomas book, he says it's the control of data inputs, right? Use and generation of data, protection and safe storage, right? Most importantly, the safe storage part is also very important. And obviously of the analysis and description and documentation of the data. It also involves creating data outputs, reservation of data, and making data outputs. If you can see the correlation between these two definitions, they do actually align when it comes to the most important part, which is from the creation of data and all the way to making it available, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever research that you are collecting, or rather you are embarking on, the main aspect and the main goal is also to be able to disseminate that information. But you want to disseminate that information or that research in the most credible and the most reliable manner as well. And that doesn't happen if you don't actually practice good research data management. And I'll jump into some of those examples as I proceed. But I would like to just end up with definitions with regard to data management, or rather research data management, by pointing out that research data management is a general term that describes what researchers do in order for them to be able to structure and maintain data before and after doing research, right? So it's the methodological aspect and the approach that you currently have on how you're going to make, or rather manage that data, and actually make sure that it's accessible. And majority of the time, because we are research students or we are researchers, we normally don't pay attention to the importance of actually having a plan, a structured approach to managing your research. And hence you find most people, they run in tangent when it comes to managing their data and writing up their papers and completing their research on time. It's because they do not actually start with the research data management plan, which is very important. And there are various policies out there that can actually help you structure, or rather develop, a research plan for your research. And then further definition says, in this sense, anyone who collects or uses data for the purpose of doing research and doing so research data management, creating a data file and deciding where to save it, renaming it to data file, or moving into all other research is very important in the data management aspect. So in essence, that's what definition of what research data management is. It is the structuring and organizing and maintaining the data before you actually conduct research and after you've conducted research. And then obviously this encompasses the life cycle that is included within that, right? And then part of that is also to understand that the idea behind data management is to use a set of techniques, right, and structures in order for you to be able to document this information and preserve it, and also that so that you can be able to reproduce that information and make sure that whoever actually is able to utilize your information is able to reproduce your information as well, or rather your data or your research, and making sure that whatever that is reusable has actually been vetted out through a whole process. And what is that process? If you look at the life cycle or data life cycle, often used to illustrate a cyclical nature of research. So you remember, you will start by planning your research, and then you'll collect your information, you'll process and analysis. Many aspects take place in that process. You will clean your data. That's where you do your data analysis and all of that. And then you will actually analyze, and finally you have to preserve that data. But before you actually preserve your data, obviously with researchers, you do the write-up, and after the write-up, you publish your information, whether it's through a dissertation, a thesis, whether it's journal papers, whether it's conference papers. There's many ways to disseminate that information, whether it's book chapters or full books as well. And then eventually that information needs to be preserved. And there's the important aspect of why that information needs to be preserved, is so that that information should be able to be reusable, right, and traceable, so that other people are able to actually utilize it. But what is the other most important aspect into this? You need to understand that the research data management is very centric, or rather a centric view into research, right? But rather it actually helps because it also includes other factors into play. Like, for example, it might help you to be able to apply for funding, because if you manage your research properly, then you have credible information that has been collected, and it's viable, it's processed and managed efficiently. Then it helps you when you are actually writing up your proposals for funding, for example, because then you have your data set in. So whenever for example, if you look at NRF, when you do the applications for funding, for example, they will go in and say, what are the research outputs that you've done in the past 8 years, for example, and then you would have to now go and dig up and try and find out that information, or rather that data or research. But if you have a proper data management system in place and you follow the life cycle, you're actually able to complete your funding processes and even publish, or sometimes even if you want to reuse some of the data sets to improve on your research that you're working on, then with the proper management system that you put in place in terms of research, then you're able to do that effectively and efficiently. And this is one of the example of a diagram that looks into what a life cycle of a data, or rather research data management. So you'll see it always starts with the research question, right? Your objective, your aim of research, right? What you are trying to do, which is your unit of observation, and sometimes it's also your unit of analysis, where you're trying to collect data from. And then you go out and collect data, right? And you want to read from collecting data, you search and you reuse the data that actually is readily available, which was actually done by other researchers, and that can be collected in various platforms, but I'll explain that to you guys in detail later on in the presentation. Then you've got your data management plan. Then this is where you now have to lay out your plan. So I know a lot of people skip that part. They do their research questions, and they plan out their research in terms of research design, research methodology, objectives, data collection instruments, and so forth. And then they skip all the way to start collecting their data. I think it's very important to stop the buck where after you've searched for all your information, say, okay, how am I going to make sure that this information is easily accessible for myself and other researchers in future should we need to reuse this particular data? That's where your data management and data research management plan comes in. How do you structure it? And we'll go through some of the aspects, the most important ones as I proceed. And then remember, the most important part here, after you've collected your data, is to describe it, obviously. Describe your data storage, recollection of your information, and then only then you can move to analysis and archiving, sometimes even publication of your information. So I've seen people most of the time, they move from research question, finalizing their structure, which is a proposal, they collect the data, and they move into publishing their information, and then it stops there, the buck stops there. So that's not what a proper researcher, or rather a proper researcher or research management should actually focus on. Only just being able to do your research and publish, so you need to be able to manage it. And trust me, in my own experience, I've experienced the good side and the most important side of actually making sure that your data is properly managed. Because when I was doing an NRF application earlier last year, for example, you'd be surprised of the amount of information research-wise they would require from you. But if I didn't have a proper records management system, which is closely research related to research data management, I would have actually not been able to complete the application itself. So these things come in handy in many various forms in terms of the benefits, which I'll also touch in later on. Well, there's other cycles as well that you can actually focus on in terms of data management life cycles. For example, it starts with the planning, documenting your information, protecting your information, making sure that it's stored efficiently, and then being, in terms of open, it simply means accessibility. Who has rights to your information? Who do you give access to information? Obviously, in today's age, we use like your Google OneDrives, for example, or you use OneDrive, for example. That's where you can give access permissions to whomever you deem fit to be able to have access to your data. And that's part of actually data management for your research as well. And then eventually preserving. And then preserving also, there's a fine line between what you preserve and what you don't preserve, and how long do you preserve your information for example. So in there, you might actually even want to go as far as looking at the records management life cycles as well, in terms of what is the given period in terms that you can actually you can preserve information. But in this context, you can't even just comply to the policy if you're still working on your research. You just need to figure out the most important aspect to how long can I keep this information? Is it necessary to keep this information after I've used this information? So those are the key determining factors that you need to put in place when you are about to embark, or rather journey into your research. The other cycles also include the likes of research planning, research proposal, research setup, research conducting, and research publication, which I've just explained in the previous slide as well. Now, moving on to the most important key aspects of why do we need to actually manage data, or rather, why do we need to manage the research data? For example, is to make sure that your data is, or rather your research is, reproducible, right? Number two, it's replicable, and most importantly, retraceable as well. So the most important thing here is to understand that whoever was not originally involved in your research needs to be able to actually use and repeat your research. For example, utilizing like methods, for example, your research methods. Some other person who was actually not involved in your research can now be able to reuse your methodology or methodological process that you actually utilized, right? That's another aspect. Making sure that it's replicable, right? Researchers who were not part of your research need to be able to obviously to repeat the research that you have done, but be also able to utilize their own newly collected information, incorporate it with yours, and actually eventually can come up with the similar results. Another part here is to make sure that it's retraceable. And that's very important because that speaks to the originality of your information. It also speaks to the credibility of your information as well, because then anyone who can actually use your information can be confident that your information was actually utilized without any changes. But however, should there be any changes made into your documentation, you have to record all of that as well. So you get to a point where you do your analysis of your data, you've done all the collection, and then you get to a point where you're like, I'm done with it, but I wanted to add additional information, just a small portion, just to touch on a certain objective that you wanted to address. You go in and address that objective, but you don't save that information. That actually that is a change into your original data set, and that needs to be recorded and placed into your research data management, because then it creates what? It makes sure that your research is credible and anyone else can actually trace your information, where it comes from, with the changes that were made and why those changes were made. So if you read this in particular, it says research data are evidence. If you have ever watched CSI, this is like the chain of custody that ensures evidence in a criminal case hasn't been contaminated. So you should be able to treat your research data similar to how you would treat any information that you would have in a criminal case. So very important, because then it needs to what? Be reused, most importantly. So now I'll move into different ways of collecting data in research, and some of you might be, or rather might be, familiar with this. These are the ways in which you can collect data. Some of them obviously include surveys that we have, most of us are privy to. They come in questionnaires, they come in structured interviews, for example. I've done both in my PhD, where I both utilized questionnaires and structured interviews and at a go. But you also have interviews which are semi-structured, where you can even have in-depth conversation with people. That's one other way of collecting data. You can also use the observation, where you are just recording behaviors and events in the natural setting or in a controlled or even sometimes an uncontrolled environment as well. And then you've got your focus groups as well, that gives us another way of you can collect data from. And then most importantly, you've got your secondary data analysis also, which I'm seeing quite a lot of these secondary data research popping up in the last couple of 5 years in my radar, like your systematic literature reviews, for example, bibliometric analysis, for example. If you're looking at your meta-analysis, for example, that I've seen desktop research, for example, and this is also incorporated as part of the ethics as well, because you will realize that now there are different forms as well that you can actually utilize for ethical clearance as well. Like if you're looking at your interviews focus group, that's more human centric, then you'll use your other human centered form. And then you've also got your secondary data form. So your primary data would normally be like your interviews and stuff like that in your experiments. And then your secondary data is when you actually utilizing explicit knowledge, for example, knowledge that has already been recorded down and then it's explicit. And then if you're collecting empirical data, then you use another form for ethical reasons. But that's another way of collecting data. And then obviously the last one, normally used in science and health and engineering, it's the experiments aspect of collecting data. So these are different various ways in which you can collect data. Now, I've already alluded to the importance of why we need to manage research data, but I want to rather allude to the most critical aspect into why we actually have to manage your research data. So the first one is to make sure that your research has integrity and actually has gone through validity processes, right? This ensures that your research data is accurate, complete, reliable, and most importantly, has gone through many variable verifying processes, and make sure that your data is verifiable as well, which actually enables the supporting for future other studies as well. I've already alluded to reproducibility, for example, in validation in the previous slides as well. But that's one of the major importance of making sure that your data is actually managed, is to make sure that your data can be reproduced and, most important, can be validated over time. And all of this is to make sure that there's no misinterpretations or errors in your data, right, in your research. Because I've seen situations where 10 years later, a research project is revisited because the research was not properly validated, because as people progressed and proceeded doing research in that particular, they started seeing discrepancies in certain data sets, and then they revert back to the old research data, that the original research that was conducted, and only to find out the data was not actually properly collected and was not properly conducted. There's some discrepancies into the data as well. So that's very important when you manage these data, is when all that comeback actually gets to your table and says, hey, there's something wrong with your data set and all of that. You can actually be able to account for that data and say, and most people don't go and think as far as that. They just always think, I'm collecting this data and it's this research project that's so daunting, because I know some people find research very daunting, especially those ones that normally do their coursework as well. It's like, I can do this coursework, but if I'm doing this particular research and now I need to spend time trying to understand this methodological and all of that, and then you miss this one important aspect, which is how to manage your data. You just collect your data, you just do your research thesis or your dissertation or your main dissertation for the sake of completing it, but then later on it backfires because properly done. So very important for future use that you manage your data and verify it very well for future use. Now, continuing into the importance of managing your research data is to make sure that you have good governance practices, which minimize interpretation, as I've also mentioned. It also aids in fulfilling funding and publisher requirement, promotes practices and transparency of accountability as well. It saves times as well, and also minimizes data losses and damages, and also ensures protection of your intellectual property, or rather the institution's intellectual property, depending on what the setting is and what the agreement is between yourself as a researcher and your institution that you work for. And then now moving on to the strategies for managing research data, for example, which I just only squashed these ones into a one slider, which I'll read in detail. So it's important to create a data management plan outlining how you will manage your data, including storage, structure, backup, and storage protocols, and making sure that you understand the sharing protocols. Those are very important, because then you are able to understand who is eligible to view your data and who is not. How do you ensure that you manage access to your data? And sometimes do you go the public route where it's publicly available in any case? But what is publicly available? Is it the output, which is the research publication? But what about the raw data? How do you keep the raw data? Who has access to the raw data? Do you need to keep it, or do you need to let it go? Right? Those are some of the things that you need to look at. So also consider the types of data that you will be collecting as well. That's very important, because the type of data that you're collecting will directly influence the volume, right? And eventually directly influence the storage costs and the software that you're going to use and the structure that you're going to use. So consider what types of data that you're collecting. So if it includes videos and large video files and all of that, that will have a direct cost into your storage space and the types of software that you use, whether it's compression software, for example, whether it's storage, as for example, if you're utilizing images, if you're utilizing websites, for example, or web links, for example, there is some level of security that you need to take into account when you're utilizing all those data sets. And making sure that you are always consistent and descriptive in naming your file and folders as well. That's another strategy that you can utilize to manage your research data, especially for you guys as students, or some of you guys in this audience who are students. Make sure that you maintain a detailed record of your research, including data collection methods, analysis steps, and any decision made throughout the research process. And that's what a lot of people actually don't do. You'd find that they do a research, but they don't actually record each and every detail from the collection, the methods they utilized. They just solely rely on, oh, I've actually published this thesis or dissertation, so the proof is in the pudding, which means everything else that I did is in this document. But sometimes whatever that you actually did is not entirely properly recorded into your studies. For example, there were data analysis techniques that I utilized that I had to do outside SPSS, that I had to actually collect and actually scan those documents and put them back into a folder, because I had to record the various stages in which I collected data, how I analyzed data, the methods that I used. Because sometimes there were methods that I utilized that were not in a computerized environment, which were outside. And how do you record that? There's many various ways. You scan through your document, have files, and determine if those files need encryption or not, which I'll get into those in the next slides. Now, what are the different tools and ways of storing your research data, for example? So essentially, there are many other aspects that you can utilize. There are many techniques, and most importantly, these are very important because it actually enables you to manage your data efficiently. Some of these are ELNs, for example, electronic lab notebooks, for example, that you can use. Examples include LabGuru, for example, eLab Journal, for example, and these are some of the platforms that you can actually utilize for your data storage. Again, if you look at the previous slide, I did mention that the type of data will influence the type of tools that you utilize. So you should be able to determine which tools you will use depending on what type of data that you're going to go into. So that's very important. And I know it is a tedious process, considering the fact that you've got this research project that needs to be done in a year or 2 years time before you actually reach your minimum residency period in your studies as a student that you've recorded. And obviously fees included in that. Now you don't even have the cost to actually spend more money in data storage spaces and these other platforms that are available for you managing your data. But trust me, in the long run, they do come in handy. I've utilized them before. They actually help very much in the long run. Some of them include your cloud storage and collaboration platforms. So these are platforms that you can actually utilize, you easily use. Like, for example, Microsoft Teams. In the platform for collaboration, for example, you have the file sharing aspect into Microsoft Teams that you can actually use. If you use web services, which is Amazon Web Services, you can also utilize that. Most people always go for Google Cloud platforms because number one, they are built into their student profile as well, which means it's easy for you to get. And they mostly they are a bit cheaper to actually maintain and manage, for example. And the accessibility and the security aspect of it is also very easy to look into. And then there's GitHub as well. This is another way of version control, collaboration software for development as well. This is another platform that you can actually utilize in order for you to manage or rather store your data. Then you've got your survey tools as well. I think when I was doing my research, I used SurveyMonkey as well. I still have access to it, even though I had to pay a certain fee, a monthly fee every month for me to have access to my data. But that was a fee I was willing to incur for the bigger picture, which is completing the PhD study. So, but in a way, it actually does help and plays a role in managing your data and storing your data. Reference management tools, for example, like your EndNote, Referex. We've got your other ones like your Biblioshiny, for example. It's another way that you can actually utilize to also store, even though it also allows you to analyze your data in a way. And then you've got your other ones like your research data management services that are also provided by the university. So I would suggest that instead of actually going into your own pocket, maybe realize or rather identify what other data management services that are readily available for students within the university space. So, and remember, these are geared to help all researchers manage their data effectively. So if you visit your library, for example, if you visit your postgraduate center, they will give you directives in terms of where to go and which platforms we do have licensing for as a university as well. So sometimes you don't even have to spend so much money on these platforms because they are readily available and accessible. And then this is a slide. Obviously, I will be sharing this slide with the CDBE team. So this will be actually go into your files that you can actually share with other people and you can actually keep for yourself. So these are some of the platforms that you can actually utilize for your data publishing, reporting, interpreting, analyzing, storing, collecting, and there are many others, but I just wanted to allude to these ones that are normally utilized in order for you to be able to manage your data, either from the collection, conceptualizing, all the way to disseminating your information and storing your information. Now, I want to touch on the most important part because these are the last 2 points that are very important in here for me because it also speaks to one of my research fields that I would like to look into the future, like your data integrity and accessibility, evaluating and verifying the viability of data that we actually use on a day-to-day basis. Because again, remember, we are in an AI driven environment now, which is highly sensitive, or rather data sensitive as well. You can get into a position of writing a full-on paper on data that you get on AI, which is false. On sometimes that information can be leaked in and actually be utilized or collected through AI platforms as well. So that's very important that we take note into that. So moving on to treating research data with privacy and confidentiality. A lot of people don't take that into consideration. It's because maybe you are in a mode of collecting data and you're having fun and you're going through this, but you don't actually become cognizant of the data integrity and accessibility and make sure that the data is private and is confidential, which parts should be publicized, which shouldn't be publicized. There are instances sometimes, for example, where you're conducting research, for example, and you realize at the end of the research that, oh, the type of data that I'm currently sitting with is actually very sensible and cannot be publicly available like that in that manner. It should only be utilized for the purpose of research and for your studies, and only that, nothing else. because you realize later on as you are collecting data, it's like, hey, I'm actually collecting very sensitive information about my institution. And if I get this out there, then it tarnishes the image of that particular institution, which is your one. So you need to be very careful in terms of how you do that, because it falls part of them. And how do you ensure that? The first part is to ensure that you encrypt your data. Always encrypt your files. Some people who are always around me always say, are you paranoid or what? My USBs, if I'm using a USB or hard drive, it's encrypted. Sometimes it's even double encrypted to ensure that whatever data I currently have access to, no one has access to it unless they ask for that information and are eligible to be given that information. If that information is sitting with me, but I still can't actually send that information out, who do I ask permission to in order for me to give that particular information to someone or that research to someone else? Because these research projects and these research do reveal certain aspects into how we live our day-to-day lives and how we operate as businesses and organizations as well. So most important, encrypt your information. Very important. Utilize passwords. And I cannot stress this enough. And I'm liking the fact that the university is very serious about ensuring that we do these data security trainings, for example, to ensure that, because those certain security trainings actually do come back and actually inform how we actually protect ourselves with even our research data as well. So ensuring that you don't get phished, for example, because if they get access to that particular research and they were not supposed to, we could be held for ransom, for example. Or sometimes you could be handing over people's personal information, which is not wrong. And hence the POPI Act is very important, right? So you need to make sure that whoever has access to that data or whomever you want to give access to that data is authorized to actually to give that information. All of this is to ensure that you limit the unnecessary exposure of information that is not supposed to be out there. Obviously, physical secure devices as well, and paper document, protect devices and paper document from misuse. And so, for example, all the data sets that I have utilized that were physical, I made sure that if I don't need to have them, I shred those documents, for example, because you don't want to keep them alive. And according to the information regulatory, you're not supposed to have information, or rather information of people lying around in your tables and stuff. And so remember, some of these research data sets contain people's personal details, because you are interviewing so and so, they mentioned their name and you didn't anonymize their name, and you have a document sitting at your table. It actually says who said this in your research. So that's very important to protect other people's integrity and images as well. So that's very important. And make sure that whenever you store information, you store it in locked away. And I know a lot of people might say, I don't have time for that, but you actually have to store all your information away. You cannot have an USB drive and have it unencrypted, for example. And another example, which is very important, you cannot just take any USB from anyone and try and send anything from them, and without actually understanding that your devices are properly secured to actually withstand whatever that might be extracted, because there is cybersecurity that comes into play. And sometimes research actually is affected the most. I don't know if many of you are listening to the news, for example. With me, I'm actually even preview, because when I had the news, I was actually at the hospital at the time. I'm accompanying someone. So the lab, the health labs were hacked, and it halted how we actually utilize information. In terms of all the data sets that was sitting in the lab, all the tests and all of that, it halted that. As much as it wasn't easily publicized, but that happened. And when I read through the news, because I couldn't understand why are we taking longer to get results and all of that, it only to find out that the labs where this research, because remember, blood tests and all of that form part of research at the end of the day. And then wherever they are stored, that's a proper plan that needs to take place in order for that particular information or data or research needs to be stored for future use as well. So if things like that can happen into a national lab, health lab, for example, imagine how damaging it could be into the entire national database, for example. So that's important, so that you understand the importance of protecting that research, because it might affect not just yourself, but the institution, and sometimes it just goes as far as the country as a whole. And currently we are moving into a digitized world, which is we were moving into it, but we're now in a more digitized environment, which now forces each and everyone else to work digitally and all of that. But now that also prompts us to actually what to be facing and being exposed to your cybersecurity threats, your hacking, your data hacks, and all of that. So that's very important that we understand these skills and actually learn how to manage your data effectively and efficiently. That way, you are also complying to protecting personal information of other people and yourself, and then eventually you are able to actually give information only when you can actually attest that this is exactly the person I need to give and they have authority. So I also did a research a couple of years back where we were focusing on the likes of including your ISO standards, for example. So I was looking at the records management ISO standards. It's international standard operating so practices. Those are some of the principles that you can actually utilize to manage your data as well, so that you ensure that your data management processes are effective and efficiently, and most importantly, comply to national and international compliance regulations as well. Very important. And this actually relates to what your research projects as well. And then continuing into treating research with privacy and confidentiality, the most important, avoid acquiring sensitive data unless necessary as well. I think sometimes I've mentioned all of this in terms of how do you manage data and all of. Sometimes the buck needs to stop into you asking yourself in your research problem or your research embed by asking yourself, do I need this sensitive information? I've seen people ask demographic information, but when I sit with the student and say, do you really need this information? How is it going to link to your research objective or research observation or research unit of analysis? And then they don't have an answer for me. And the minute you don't have an answer and we can't derive to a conclusion of why do we need this sensitive information from these individuals, then I don't want to be accountable to collecting, or rather collecting that data that we're not going to be using, because now you have actually binded yourself to having access to personal information of people, sensitive information that you actually don't need. Should there be any breach, then now you are held liable for that. So I think you need to stop there and say, do I need this information? If not, I don't need this data for my research. It's not applicable to my research data. So always make sure that you so these are ways that you can actually minimize your data breaches, and making sure that you comply to all the POPIA acts. You don't actually have to go as far as protecting your devices. You can actually stop at your research problem, research statements. That's why I say most of the time, spend your time looking at your unit of observation, unit of analysis. That will enable you to collect only what you need and leave out what you don't need. And in turn, you're able to chunk out the unnecessary sensitive information that you would have collected. So that's why it's important to spend time with your research problem. What is it that you are trying to do, which is your research analysis? And where are you trying to do it? Am I trying to collect information at a health environment, or rather health institution? What information do I need there? What types of data do I need? Sometimes you can conduct research in a health facility, but you don't need actually sensitive information. We've conducted research before in a HIV testing environment, but we did get all the necessary ethical approval permissions and so forth. When it was time for me to collect the data with the research partner, I asked them, do we really need all this information in terms of the clients and the patients? And then I derived to say, oh, we actually looking at how we can utilize artificial intelligence to improve access to information, or rather access to health information for patients. So we don't need health information, right? We don't need any patient's information. We're just utilizing the perception on whether this can work. So we're actually dealing with the management part, the people that are working in that institution. We don't need any sensitive information because we are only looking to improve on that by not actually getting access. So it's very important that you also understand that. And then another part is protecting your devices, which I think I've already mentioned as well. Always follow the basic cybersecurity hygiene by using antivirus softwares, for example, and not your readily and freely accessible, available antiviruses, properly vetted antiviruses that you can actually utilize and it can actually help. Sometimes use a whole disk encryption, for example, which I normally use on a day-to-day basis. I think I learned it from the university because they gave us that, and then I started utilizing that one. And make sure that you search for other ones that are out there that you can actually use, other antiviruses that you can utilize to protect your data. Because I know some other people, they even thumb through their own cell phones and they stumble into an article and then save it in their phone. Make sure that your phone is also encrypted and is actually has all the right software, protection softwares as well. Apologies for that. And then now also important, also note that POPIA actually provides the establishment of information regulatory process to regulate privacy and access to information. Provide research participants with clear, concise privacy notice as well. So these are consent forms, for example. It's very important that you always give out consent forms for people to give you consent, whether they want you to collect the data or how you're going to use the data, because you cannot just illegally collect data from individuals that don't want. I've had one incident before when someone was saying they're going to interview people and give them pizza. And I'm like, but that's not ethical. You're not complying to POPIA Act. That's not the right way to go. You cannot just incentivize people and say they need to consent and actually be consenting of the fact that they are willing to give you the information, but you don't have to buy them pizzas or anything like that. And most importantly, when you get to a point of POPIA, because it is very descriptive and very detailed, maybe consult legal professionals. I think in the university, there are individuals that are working in the compliance offices. That can actually, even your research supervisors can actually advise you in terms of how to go about ensuring we comply to POPIA. The university has already put in templates as well for us to complete if you are collecting certain type of information. So you can even complete that form, and I'm sure your supervisor should be able to have access to those templates that you can utilize, which are POPIA related, before you even embark and collect data in any case. Now, moving on to the last point, which is complying, or rather compliance with the institutional policies. It's very important, as much as you want to collect data and do your research and eventually become the best researcher in the world, that gets these nice citations and has some submits in high impact journals. It's always important to look into your institutional policies around research data, publications, and research fundings as well, in order for you to be able to practice that ethically. So remember, institutional policies often are designed actually to align to relevant laws like your POPIA Act, for example, and ensures that we are all abiding to ethical guidelines. And all of this is to ensure that we minimize the risk of legal issues and penalties for non-compliance. And most importantly, it aids in the following. But very importantly, most companies are getting fined for not complying with these regulations, for example, and they find big money, for example. I will not give examples that I know of, but there are companies that I've known of that have actually had to pay so much because they didn't regulate themselves, or they didn't comply to these POPIA Act or regulation or data research regulations, right? So that's very important in your case to also think as big as far as how does my research practices or management comply to university regulations when it comes to research data. That's why you can even visit your postgraduate centers. You can visit your library because they do have access to this information. And how does all of this help? It helps also to facilitate collaboration and open access and having access to open science as well. It ensures that your research is ethical and you practice it accordingly. Because if your university has a research committee, for example, that you need to go into in order to get research ethical clearance, they make sure that your research practices are ethical, right? They ensure that you've complied to all the regulation. If you bypass that and collect data without consulting that, the sad part is that when you start to publicize recently as well, or even in the past, all the publication companies, or rather publications offices, are very strict in order for you to publish or submit your publication. They need that ethical clearance. If you don't have that ethical clearance that shows that you have permission, they won't accept your papers. So in any case, you need to be able to comply to university regulations so that you can able to meet all the requirements for publishing your results or your research in any case. So this also allows you to be able to meet up with all the legal regulatory requirements as well, in a nutshell. It actually helps you to maintain public trust and prevents reputational damage as well. So that's why it's important to understand where the university stands in terms of how do we collect data, how do we manage data, and how do we disseminate data, and how do we preserve data. What are we allowed to use? What are you not allowed to use? And even if you, as far as when you are entering meetings, for example, I know the university is very strict in allowing AI generated platforms to be part of your meetings in on Teams, for example, but still people still include them in there. That's not you complying to that. I know it's note taking for you at the time because you are collecting data. It's a form of verification so that you can do your member checking or evaluating your data set when you're collecting your interview. Maybe you're collecting your data maybe via interviews, for example. So you might be collecting your data via interviews and using an AI note taking, but it's actually, according to university law, that is not allowed, right? Because you don't even have control of that AI platform. You don't know how far, to what extent it can be utilized against you, and in turn that can actually and make sure and damage actually the reputation of the university, or should the wrong information get out through an AI generated note taking platform. So also, it also enables you to allow yourself to be in a state where you can avoid data breaches and data misuse, for example. And hence you see the trainings that are taking place within the university. I think mostly it's for staff members, but it's also good for students as well to be aligned with some of these data and security trainings as well. And then it also allows you to be able to share data and collaborate in a more ethical way. Because if you do comply to university regulations, whenever you collaborate with people, whenever you share data, you know that you are well within the university regulations and policies around research data and management. And most important, lastly, it actually enhances the efficiency of your research in the long run. I would like to stop here and say thank you very much for listening to me. I hope this was fruitful. I will now open up for questions if there are any questions. So I'm not currently looking at the chat session. I think, okay, so if you can assist me with that, I would greatly appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumalo, for sharing that information. This was such a fruitful workshop and very insightful. I think we all needed this information, especially all the students that are busy with the PhDs, masters, and those who are writing articles. This was very, very, very fruitful. And I will now open the floor for questions. So the chat box is open, and if you prefer to raise your hand, please do so, and then I will enable your mic, then you can unmute yourself. Any questions? And while we're still waiting for questions, Dr. Kumalo, just to emphasize on some of the information that you shared,
Yes.
I noticed that I don't know if it's beginning of this year, the beginning of this year, or yeah, at the beginning of this year, I noticed that now the ethical clearance application form actually they have added a form where you have to complete that form regarding the personal information impact assessment,
Yes.
which speaks to the data integrity and the POPIA. And in that form, they actually ask some of the questions about how much sensitive or personal information you're collecting, and is it necessary to collect this information, and also how are you planning to keep the data safe. So this just speaks to how much data integrity is important. So I don't know if this is happening across all faculties, but during my when I applied for my ethical clearance, that I had to complete that form, which is very detailed, and they need all the information about data integrity. So I think we all need to just consider that in our studies, and when we're busy conceptualizing how we're going to collect this information and all that. So thank you for sharing that information. Is very, very, very useful. I saw a hand from.
I think it was Mthokozisi, if I'm not mistaken.
Thokozisi, okay. Please, you can unmute yourself and then speak, Thokozisi.
Hi, Doc. Nice session, by the way. I wanted to ask that for secondary data collection, which
Yes.
management software would you recommend?
Can you repeat that? I'm losing you. I don't know if it's my network or your side. Okay, so if you had that, can you just maybe translate?
I'm so sorry. I also didn't hear him. Can you please repeat the question?
Okay, I was saying that for secondary data collection, which data management software would you recommend?
So in recent times, the one that I have been recently using, right? Because for secondary data management or for secondary data that I've been collecting, it's mostly been on bibliometric analysis. So remember now you are collecting references in a way. So I always encourage people to use the likes of EndNote because it is especially if you're doing using a Prisma flow diagram, for example, you can build in your Prisma flow diagram into that, and then it actually allows you to actually populate or rather import those articles in there. So that's your EndNote. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, I think the university is only using, is it EndNote? Yeah, it is EndNote. And then I think we used to use Mendeley, we used to use Reference as well. So those are the three main ones that I would normally recommend as well, because at least you have access to them, and it's through your own it uses your own credibility, your credentials as well. And for that type of secondary data, that's what I would use. And then remember, the nicest thing about those ones is that even for referencing purposes, and I know how much people hate referencing as well, for referencing purposes, or when you're doing like your data, your secondary data research, then it's easier because whatever that you've stored in there, there's an option where you can just create a reference list, whether it's Harvard or AP, on whatever the case that you want to create, depending on what the institution rules are in terms of your referencing. Then you can have your old references, whatever that you've utilized in that same and in those same softwares. So those are the three that I've mainly used. It's EndNote, RefWorks, and Mendeley in the past when I've been doing my research. Even with my honors students, that's what I normally would use with them.
Understand,
Okay.
but my research is include the secondary data, raw secondary data that was collected from medical laboratories around Gauteng. So dealing with patient medical records. So I don't know how can I manage and store the data so that the data can be secure for my research purposes.
Okay, so if you look at these ones, for example, your LabGuru, for example, these are some of the ones that you can use. If you utilize there's many other softwares as well that you can actually utilize, but you might have to pay quite a lot of money for those ones. So that's why I always advise to people to say, instead of spending money, especially if you're dealing with that, if it is a funded project, then maybe go for paid ones. I know that Microsoft has other cloud services that you can pay for, that you can actually utilize. So I'd maybe suggest that you go for like credible companies that you already know, like your Google Drive and OneDrive from Microsoft as well, to manage that, because at least then you have access to that. But there are other software ones, but for medical purposes as well, because I'm hardly ever in that space, I don't want to advise you on a certain particular one, because majority of the time I know that they are paid for, unless your research is actually unless your research is funded to do that. But I would suggest then maybe have a look at the various types that I've already shared with you guys in here in terms of storage. But I know for the most part, the Google Drive, Amazon Web Services, and OneDrive are the best ones that you can actually use. Rather use accredited data storage company, like for example your Microsoft and them, and pay a small fee, rather than just having not the not so known ones out there. because that way at least you know that your data has backups as well and is properly and you know that they do have data centers in South Africa as well, so it makes it easier for you to store your data. And depending on the quantity of the data that you actually have access to as well. So that's as far as I can go in terms of that particular data, because yeah, you are handling quite sensitive data, so you might need high-end softwares for that as well.
Okay, thank you, Doc.
Okay.
Thank you for that. If I could ask the question, Dr. Kumalo, maybe to help those who are still in the proposal stage of their research, is it when you are busy discussing the trustworthiness of your research, the validity, the reliability, is it necessary or is it a requirement for you to discuss how you're going to store or you manage your data, or is it something that you do in the background without really informing people?
So I have a standard answer that normally actually everyone else mostly follow, and then I've got a personal answer to it. So standard answer is it's normally built into the background, right? Where it's taking place anyway, but we all know that people don't do it behind the scenes, right? They just open a folder on OneDrive or on the USB and they start having files and whatever that they have, they store in there. But for me, I think it is important for you to actually state in the proposal, because as it binds you to the manner in which you are going to handle your data going forward with your research. I always mention that in my proposals to say, this is how we ensure that we're going to mention. In any case, if you do ethical clearance forms, in my case, in the College of Business and Economics, there is a section there where it asks you where you're going to store the data and how you're going to store it. So it's built into your proposal in any case, now in our side, right? And that's the standard one. And I've seen people bypass it. That's the thing, depending on the faculty, because we don't all comply in the same way, or rather practice the same way. But what I would suggest is that when you do your ethical clearance form, because it does come with your proposal, then do it all at once instead of just building it behind the scenes. And then what you have on the document, you also make sure that you follow behind the scenes, because I've seen people do the clearance forms, write all of that, but when they're done with their data, when someone is looking for that particular data, it's nowhere to be found. So I'd approach it in a hybrid manner where I'm complying to the university's regulations by including it in the proposal, the ethical clearance form, and so forth. And behind the scene, I already have the mechanisms and actually doing it behind the scenes as well. So I formally submit that, include it in there and state it, and then also practice it on the other side so that you ensure that you are compliant in all aspects, both in paper and both in practice, if that makes sense. Does it make sense, Koketo? Have I lost you, Koketo?
Oh my gosh. Hello, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it does make sense. It does make sense. Thank you very much. Victoria has her hand up. Let me allow your mic. Please unmute yourself, Victoria.
Good morning.
Morning,
Okay.
Victoria.
Morning.
Okay, so I'm a first year master's student. So yeah, most of the things are a bit confusing. But what I wanted to ask is if I got into the meeting a bit late, but I saw a slide on the DMP. So I wanted to know like using that tool, is it mandatory first of all? And second of all, how do we use it in our research? Whereas my research is heavily reliant on secondary sources of data because it's analyzing the historical context of a specific country. So I wanted to know, like, is it mandatory to use DMP? And if it is, how do I use it in relation to secondary sources of data?
Okay, I think yeah, you're right. In a bit late because I'd already addressed one of that in but I don't mind explaining it again. So One, the purpose of this particular workshop, Victoria, is to show awareness and the importance of research data management. So for one, maybe it's not even included in the policy. Koketso can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is, for me, I feel it's one of those mandatory things that you need to have in terms of your data management plan. How are you going to manage that data? Um, for example, where are you collecting the information? Why are you collecting information? What file formats is that information? How long can I keep that information? And what other tools can I utilize for me to be able to manage that information? So in terms of secondary data, if I can just quickly ask you a question, are you utilizing databases, or are you utilizing what is your unit of observation? Where are you collecting this information from?
I'm using scholarly articles, books. So yeah, I'm just looking for scholarly
Okay.
views on, because I'm researching on pre-colonial and colonial Zimbabwe. So I'm looking for books
So you also,
and scholarly articles like which revolve around that.
yeah, so you're along the lines of meta-analysis, systematically to review bibliometric analysis. So I would, that one is easy because it's built into the systems that we currently use to even analyze the data, because the analysis tools normally play also the part of data management and data storage tools as well. So for example, I've just mentioned your RefWorks, for example, which is probably what you're probably going to be utilizing. You're going to be using maybe VoiceView or some to some people Shiny, for example. You can use your RefWorks, for example, to store your data for when you are obviously doing the criteria for eligibility and so forth, so that you can get to arrive to the articles that actually speak to what you're actually looking for. But that's actually a data management process. It's built into those analysis tools as well, and methods as well. So one, to answer your question, is it is important to ensure that you also have a backup plan in terms of that. How do you back up that information? How are you going to make sure that whoever wants access to that information has access to that information? Because some of these platforms are password encrypted, which means it's your username and password. For you to be able to, and some of them, they actually allow you to be able to share a particular folder with someone else using their email. So it actually is a good one. For example, RefWorks, I think it does this, and EndNote, and I think also Mendeley does that. So that's one way you can actually utilize it. But to answer you in terms of data management plan, you actually have to, because then it's built into your research in terms of, okay, I'm doing this research, what referencing tool am I going to be utilizing? As much as they are referencing tool, but I've found a way to use referencing tool as a data storage tool and a part of analysis tool, because I build in the Prisma flow diagrams folders into RefWorks, for example, or Mendeley. And then as I shift these articles according to what what way I'm getting into, I eventually get to the last articles that I'm only going to analyze to get the historical data that I'm looking for example, in your case. But you see, now I've already stored that data. So from the research databases where I collected it, whether it's Scopus, Web of Science, whatever the case may be, whether it's Google Scholar, where I've got the books and all of that, I collect and download all those documents, store them in Mendeley or RefWorks, or whatever the platform that in your case you would want to use. And then as I am assessing the eligibility of these, because they go through an eligibility criteria, I'm actually now moving certain articles as I go. But remember, these are articles now, they are actually stored in a storage platform, which also allows me to analyze, which also allows me to actually to reference as well in the end. So this one hybrid, in your case, it's very simple, because if you utilize this platform, and the university does actually offer some of those, it's just that some people only utilize them for reference purposes only, but it's actually not only utilized for you can actually utilize as part of your analysis and actually your data storage as well. So I'm not sure if I'm helping you in that case, Victoria.
You've helped me a lot, actually. Thank you so much. Because I was wondering, all of the workshops that I've been entering, I've been hearing about DMP, but then it wasn't really making sense. Like, how does it apply and all that? So yeah, now I'm getting the hang of it, like how it
Yeah.
actually helps
It's how
in the
you,
research and whatnot. Yeah.
yes, it's how you want to manage your data. Eh, the thing is, people want to manage their data separately and say, okay, I'm managing data. But no, it's your research data. That process is built into your research. That's why it's a research data management plan. How am I going to plan my data from when if I can go to this slide, for example, just want to go to this particular slide. How do I manage my data from when I started doing my research question, from my research question to data collection, then data plan, actually one aspect as well. Collection, analysis, archive, publication, and obviously there's preservation as well. And then determining when is it time for you to dispose of that data or not. So it cannot be a subset alone, which normally sits outside this life cycle. Hence, I put it in the life cycle. It's a research. It's part of it. It's whenever you had your concept and say, this is the research I want, it needs to be built into that. If it's not built to that, then it functions separately. And the minute you separate it with your research, then you are just doing research to collect data, analyze, publish, and then you walk your stage and all of that is gone. 6 years later, someone comes in and asks for that data set that you utilize. It's nowhere to be found.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. You're welcome. Any other questions?
It doesn't look like we have any other question. So if I could just
No.
ask the last question, Dr. Kumalo.
No, not a problem.
You mentioned something. You mentioned something about people still need to sign the consent forms. Or we all know that. And you
Yes.
mentioned something about the incentives that sometimes people use incentives to kind of like bribe participants to come to the research and take part.
Yes.
Just to confirm, are you saying that the incentives are not acceptable? And if the incentives are different from the benefits of the study, right?
Yeah. So if the incentives are different from the benefit of the study, correct. I'm glad that you're putting it that way. Then it's not allowed. You cannot pay someone 50 rand for them to complete a survey for you. I don't think that's ethical. That's not ethical at all. You cannot say, I'm going to take you for lunch, but I want to interview you, then you get to eat. You cannot go to the people who are sleeping in the streets because you want their perception in terms of what is their lives like in there and actually say, I'm going to buy you clothes because of that. I still don't think that's correct. That's the correct way of doing it. So unless the research itself is going to benefit that individual and the person actually, and when I say benefit for the purpose of the research. So if I'm gaining your consent, the benefit or rather incentive to the department or to the institution should be that after I've been done with this research, you will now have these recommendations that you can build into your strategy, which will now improve your study. So for example, we conducted a study on how you can, because I'm in a multidisciplinary field. So I'm in data science sometimes data analysis, sometimes is knowledge transfers and all of that. You might find yourself where you are looking at knowledge retention strategies, for example, I'll put it bluntly, for an engineering firm, right? So because you realize that over time, people in that particular organization, especially the more experienced one, the minute they reach their retirement age, they leave the organization. But what is it that they live with? They live with their knowledge, which leaves us, the new upcoming individuals, lost because one, there were no knowledge retention strategies that allows the mentoring to happen so that all the knowledge that they've gained over years gets translated to us. So what is the incentive there? The incentive is to the organization to say, if I implement this strategy that allows this knowledge to be retained in the organization, it benefits the organization for continuity, or rather business continuity, the organization improves. So it has benefited the organization because if the business continues, then the business still continues to gain the revenues and become productive as they've always been, if that makes sense. cannot just say, hey, I'm going to buy you lunch, but I need you to complete this survey. I don't think that's ethical at all.
Definitely. Oh, that's clear. That's clear. Thank you for clarifying that, Dr. Kumalo. We have a hand from Michael. Please
Yes,
unmute
sir.
yourself, Michael, and ask your question. Michael, you can unmute yourself. Hello, Michael. You can also type your question in the chat box if you are maybe struggling with your mic. I have enabled your mic now, so you can unmute yourself. Okay, while we're still waiting for Michael to unmute himself, is there any other question?
And
Okay, so I don't have.
Koketo, from my side, if people still want you, you're more than welcome to share my details with the students should they want to maybe do further follow-ups with me. I don't really mind. So that's what I normally leave to do. So if I can assist, I will.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I see Michael is mentioning that he's unable to unmute himself. So you can rather type your question in the chat box, Michael. There is no more question from my side, and besides Michael's hand, there is no other question, and there's nothing on the chat. So I will just like to take this opportunity to thank you, Dr. Kumalo, for honoring our invitation and coming and presenting this very insightful presentation. We needed this presentation, and I think everybody can agree with me. This was fruitful and we benefited so much from the session. And I would also like to thank all the attendees for taking your time and joining us and keeping the engagements going. Thank you for that. And I'll just like to give one more chance to Michael. I see he still has his hand up.
Yeah, so
Please, Michael, are you able to unmute yourself? Yes. Michael, would you rather type your question on the chat?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I don't know what happened with my mic. I wasn't able to unmute it. But I wanted to ask in one of the discussions we had in yesterday's session, the issue of incentives came up, and there are certain situations where, for instance, giving someone a pizza may not necessarily be unethical. Maybe you can guide me on this if I were to refer back to that yesterday's discussion. So, for instance, if you have respondents that are coming to you for interviews and they have traveled, I mean, they'll spend a bit of time with you, and that may require that you buy them lunch or something. You may need to give them money to travel to and back home. So in essence, you've paid for their transport and you've also bought them lunch or bought them a pizza for lunch. Would still that be unethical?
Very good question. So Michael, so first things first, you do know that the university does have visiting professors, right?
Yes.
And these professors contribute extensively to the research output of the university and the research agenda. So in that case, if you're looking at it from that particular space, and I'm gonna do a devil's advocate counter again about in terms of that. So in a way, it is allowed because if you are hosting someone for the purpose of research, which is ethically grounded and everything else has been sorted accordingly ethically, and you are hosting this particular individual, then you would do so, right? So I wouldn't say that is entirely unethical because you are hosting a research partner to your research who's trying to contribute. But in the case where I'm conducting research as a researcher, so the principle of being a researcher, what is it? Do I let people come to me, or do I go to people? Then the reason why I'm saying this is because majority of the time is you've got there's resources. That's why you have research funding, right? Because they fund you to be able to go to Cape Town and collect that data. That's the part of research. But at one point, do you pay people to come to you?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, right? Unless you are an institution that is testing a certain software, or for example, if you look at what neurosciences are doing right now, where people need to come to your lab, or psychologists, for example, students need to come to you if they are part of your research, because they need to come to your premises, right? It depends on the nature of your field. If it's in a field like mine, for example, where I need to be in a mine, for example, to collect the data, why am I having the miner come to me when I'm actually funded to actually go there? So just to be clear on that, but it's very important that you understand that's what I'm saying. I re-emphasize when I started, unit of analysis, unit of observation. What am I trying to do with my research, and where am I trying to do it? So the minute I say, where am I doing? I'm doing it there, and this is what I'm trying to do. I need to go there. I hardly ever had an instance where a participant needs to come to me for me to interview them. I need to go to their premises. Only when the field itself allows me, or rather the contest allows the forces actually the participants to be in my premises. Like, for example, if I'm testing a certain medical device that actually needs to be administered in a hospital, then that individual comes to the hospital or that particular institution. But do you give that person, if they give you consent, and then there's other incentives and they volunteer, because in most cases those types are volunteer, then you can't buy them. If you ever buy them anything, for me it is considered unethical as well.
So let me just nudge it a little bit. Let me give an example.
Yes.
Let me give an example. This is particularly with regard to a research that I was doing some time back. I was interviewing traders on the impact of taxation on their income. Okay, and these traders, they go to a market, and for them to reach the point that they sell their commodities, they had to travel to the market. Of course, I traveled to their market where they do their business. And it was on a day, and you know their market days. And market days, they are very busy. So I traveled on a day that was not a market day. And then I had to ask them to come to the market because I wanted to do a focus group discussion. So I didn't have I didn't have to go to the individuals. I had to talk to a group. And then I invited the group to a common place for a focus group discussion. They traveled to the common place, and we spent about 2 hours with them doing the focus group discussion.
Yes.
In such a case, if I, of course, without the details of the research, if I were to give them transport to come to the common place and lunch after the discussion, would that still be unethical?
It's a very good one, Michael, because now the keyword you use there is, I like it's the marketplace in which is related to their day-to-day job, even though it wasn't taking place, but that's where they play. So it's a common ground for both the researcher and them. It's not a common ground for them it's not a common ground for you where it's not even actually a common ground. It's actually a ground where they are coming to you. They were not coming to you. You are organizing to meet at a place where they actually work. So if you had to pay for them to get there when they don't need to be there, I would say in a way you did comply based on the technicalities, the fact that place that you were. If you are saying you were meeting in a restaurant, Michael, then I wouldn't have not agreed with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I wouldn't have agreed. If you were meeting in a restaurant, the common place was a restaurant. That's not the place. But now you are meeting at a place where you most likely, if you're doing, depending on your methodology, if you're doing snowballing, you're meeting them in a place where you're most likely to meet other individuals that are like them.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. So
Yes.
which now what amplifies your data collection population, or rather your population sample. So you met at a common that related to your research. So I would, if I had to incentivize those particular individual, I would have actually done the same in that case.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
But for them to come to you, and you need to incentivize them, no, it should be the other way around. You need to go to them in their premises, because you are trying to find out something that's happening with them in relation to what they do on a day-to-day basis. It's their premises. So I'm looking for the miners on how we can improve mining shafts, for example. As much as I don't want to call them and let them just tell me, I want to be in their premises. When they speak, I can also see their premises and the shafts as well. I hope I made sense.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Dr. Khumalo, both Dr. Khumalo and Michael. If I could just add on, or just to confirm, please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Khumalo. Incentives is basically when people incentives when they are not it's not integrity. So it's when people agree to be participants because of that particular incentive. For example, now, as Michael is saying, he's making means for the research to happen, and that's why they're meeting at that particular place. But if they had to, they agreed because Michael they agreed to take part in the research because Michael is actually bringing them to that place, but. I don't know if I'm making sense. I don't know, and I don't know how I can explain this. But it's not the reason why they agreed to do the research. It's just you making means for the research to happen.
Exactly. That's you making means to have for the research to happen, because remember, they are not forced to come there. And you, Michael, as well, is not forced to actually meet them in the marketplace. Michael could say, oh, maybe I don't need any information in the market space, and I don't need any information or anyone else. I'm just targeting these individuals, so I'll go straight to them. So that meeting point was mainly purely because they wanted to be there. If they wanted to be in, because they work there, they continuously go there in any case. It's beneficial to them. That's another incentive for them as well. You've paid them to go to where they actually work, and you're also doing something there. It's a common ground for all of them. So it's not they met in a restaurant. So if they met in a restaurant, I have a problem with that. I've done, for example, I've done a research in a restaurant, but I didn't have to incentivize anyone, because the participant agreed to do the research. It was a convenient place for them, so I still went to them. It was a convenient restaurant for them, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
So I wasn't taking them out or anything like that. It is a convenience restaurant. It's closer to where they work or stay, and that's a space they feel comfortable. Because I'm the researcher, I'm obligated to go to that space, not pay them to come to me. No. And that's what the nature of research is. You are researching, you are exploring. So for you to explore, you go into an adventure, into finding out something, a phenomena that you know nothing about. So you cannot find it in your space alone. Somewhere, somehow, you need to go outside. Well, there are cases where you will find people who are willing to come to your space, and they don't have it because they want to be exposed to your own environment as well. Those need to be the determining factors, not you saying, I'll give you this if you give me that. And hence, sometimes I understand that's where research becomes difficult. That's why you see more and more people moving into the secondary data approach rather than the empirical, because you know how hard it is to get access to just interview 10 people who will be willing to actually interview and give you the information that you are looking for. But yeah, that's just it from my side. Koketso. I hope I've been helpful. And I hope I've been beneficial to the audience as well. And for me, and to you as well. And thank you again for inviting me. It is an honor to be invited to actually speak to students. It is really a privilege. So I'm more privileged than them if I can correct you there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for coming to present the workshop. I see there's one last question on the chat. I don't know if you still have time to answer that.
I have
It
time,
says,
don't worry.
so if, okay. So from Eliona, and she's saying, so if I got to schools for interviews and bring with family planning services, is that considered unethical?
If they go to the school and bring with the family planning services with them.
Services.
So remember, you get a consent first. That's where the consent comes in.
Yes.
Yeah, if you are clear, let me tell you, you will not be able to do that. You will not be able to do it or not do it if you didn't go through the ethical process. They will determine if that is acceptable or not. And the school itself it has to give. Remember, with secondary data, it's sometimes there's a way that you can get around it, because, well, it's not a way, it's the right way to do it, because you're actually collecting data, but you apply for ethical clearance. You still need to apply for ethical clearance anyway, right? Whether it's from your institution or wherever you're coming from. But when it moves to and most of the time people forget that part if they're so used to the ethical clearance given within the university or institution. They forget that you still need to get your permission to conduct research from your research participants as well, or institution, or your population sample. So hence, when you complete a proper one, so that would not even happen. So I think it would be, I cannot say it's ethical. It depends on whether the ethical committee allowed it and the school gave permission to do that. If the school gives permission to do that and it's concerned, and most importantly, parents needs to know about this, right? So if the entire system school, whether it's governing body, parents, principal, has given consent for their kids to be exposed to that, then I think it is ethical. But if the school is not giving permission to that, then and you still proceed and you even bring with family planning, then that's considered you breaching the permission conditions. To say we are allowing you to come in to do your research, but you cannot bring in an additional unless it is part of this and it's part of our agenda and it's linked into some of our activities that we do on a day-to-day basis.
I agree with you, Dr. Kumalo, because in the schools also you need to have the consent from the district. So it's your institution, the district, and the school. So they must all give you permission for you to do that. So yes, I do agree with you.
Yeah. So I think that's why I'm saying that's why I said the last 3 points are very important. They are very, and a lot of time, this is where you find yourself, you're almost done with your research, you've done everything else, you just didn't meet the ethical part. How do you proceed with research that is not ethically verified? Let it be verified, let it be clear to say, because these individuals will look in, this is a set of committee that will look at the eligibility of your research. They will look at it's all about protecting the integrity of the researcher and the institution as well. So it's not these ethical committees or these ethical practices, they're not geared because they're trying to hammer on the process for you to get your research done in time. It's not that. It's way bigger than that. And most of the time I don't know if you know the Pareto principle, 20% of an issue can cause 80% of the damage, right? So very important that you understand those ones. As much as these are small practices that needs to be done before you actually do that PhD or do that master's, that means so much to you. But that small part that you don't want to go through could harm the entire dissertation or thesis in the long run. Because personally, as a supervisor, I wouldn't want to be involved in this. I wouldn't put my name on a dissertation and a thesis that doesn't have an ethical clearance, that doesn't have proper ethical permission or permission to conduct research from the research participant. I'm not going to put my name, no supervise that. I hope I'm clear, Kokezo, on yourself.
Yes, very clear, Doctor. Thank you very much. I don't think there are any more questions. There are no hands up, and there's nothing on the chat except for thank you messages that are coming through, and everybody thanking you for such a fruitful session. Thank you very much, Doctor. I think we will now conclude the session. And thanks to the participants for joining us, and all the discussions that we had. They were very fruitful and very insightful. Thank you very much. And without any further questions, thank you, Dr. Kumalo, and have a great day further.
Thank you so much, Kokezo, and the audience and everyone else from the RCD office. Please have yourself a lovely day and a lovely week ahead. Thank you. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.